Welcome to Peaceful Life Radio, your companion for navigating the second half of life with wisdom, intention, and grace. We're Don Drew and David Lowry. We're here to help you embrace your wisdom years with confidence and purpose. Now that the busy seasons of career, family, and fulfilling others' expectations are behind you, it's time to focus on what truly matters, your personal growth, relationships, and legacy. The best chapters of life are still ahead, so let's dive in.
Money is not math and math isn't money because they quite frankly behave differently. If you take a look at math, math is perfect. 1 + 1 = 2. And if you and I are around 1,000 years from today, 1 + 1 will be 2. But if you take a look at $1 today plus $1 a year from today, $1 plus $1 in a year is never going to be $2 between taxes and inflation. It erodes.
That was Harry Abrahamson, our guest on today's Peaceful Life Radio. I'm David Lowry, and with me is my good friend, Don Drew. Hello, Don.
Hello, David. I'm really excited about today's program.
I know. Don, let me tell you a little bit about Harry. He's one of the leading financial strategists in personal financial economics, specializing in helping individuals at all stages of retirement planning, and that's why we have him on our show today. He works with people who are thinking about retirement, those who are getting ready to retire, and those who are already in retirement. So that's just about everybody who's going to listen to our show. After September 11th in 2001, he realized the critical importance of properly protecting yourself from all kinds of unexpected life events and controlling your own destiny. So today, that's his philosophy. He helps his clients do the same thing. Throughout his career, Harry's clientele has shared one common objective, and that's to receive expert advice and guidance from someone they trust. Harry has his Bachelor of Science in Marketing with a minor in finance from the University of Tampa in Florida. Then post-graduation, Harry helped build a family business from the ground up. And then after 10 successful years, he founded his own company, Abrahamsen Financial Group. Harry, welcome to Peaceful Life Radio. We're so glad you're with us today.
David, thank you so much. And Don, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm excited to be here and look forward to having a nice conversation.
Harry, we're really happy to have you with us. You know, I first started investing when I was 25. I'm now 67. So it's been over 40 years. And it was one of the smartest things I ever did. Somebody came to me and said, "What are you doing to prepare for the future?" And my answer was, well, not a whole lot. And so I met my first financial advisor, and it really changed a lot of things for me. And I know that you can help other people find their way financially. You're well known for saying that money is more like oranges than math. I love that. Can you tell us what that means?
A lot of times when people are doing planning, especially retirement planning, you have to run some calculations to do things, whether it's to figure out when to take Social Security, different options maybe with pension plans. So people use mathematical calculations to determine what they should be doing. But I always say that money is not math and math isn't money because they quite frankly behave differently. If you take a look at math, math is perfect. 1 + 1 = 2. And if you and I are around 1,000 years from today, 1 + 1 will be 2. But if you take a look at $1 today plus $1 a year from today, $1 plus $1 in a year is never going to be $2 between taxes and inflation. It erodes. And so our money behaves more like oranges. If you put 4 oranges and put it in the middle of the table, got up, left, and came back a year later, how many oranges would be in the middle of the table? None. They'd rot, turn mildew. So you have to really understand how money works, especially with retirement planning, because it's a little bit easier while people are working in the wealth creation phase because you're earning a living. And then you kind of pivot and you go into the distribution phase where now the money is at work. So a very good point to make enough people to understand that money is going to erode over time and does behave a little bit differently than a pure mathematical calculation.
Harry, you wrote this wonderful book called Money Rules, 9 Rules to Massive Wealth. And I know that you did this as a result of working with so many clients over the years with your personal consulting group. Tell us what you were trying to do in this book and give us some secrets on how we can do better with our retirement planning.
There's a couple of different components of the book. The first couple of chapters are very philosophical, giving you some foundation of how to make plans. One of the chapters I talk about is needs versus wants. And a lot of times if you're planning with someone and you're talking about something and someone might say, well, I don't know if I need that. yet they drove up in a Mercedes or a nice car. They have a beautiful pair of shoes on, which technically they don't need, right? So a lot of times I'll say, if you're planning based on a need and we live in a want world, you may want to consider different options and different strategies. Another one of the chapters I talked about in the book is protection. And I use a fun example of back in feudal times, how people would display their wealth with castles. At the time, they would protect their castle and have a moat, hot oil, alligators to protect their wealth. And today, people have their paper or online castles, and there's no protection of things that could potentially happen. And again, the more you have, the more is at stake. So you have to be careful on how you're positioning what you are doing to properly protect. And then there's some chapters in the book that are very tactical to give you examples on how to do certain things and strategies that they can utilize in their everyday life.
One of the things that a lot of folks try and do is chase the market and try and predict and win by gambling on the performance of the market. You've got something to say about that.
Wherever you are, there's no way to time a market. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? So you don't always want to be chasing that rate of return. You don't want to always be trying to get that extra couple of percentage points, because the reality is all it takes is a couple of bad downturns or events that happen in your life, especially if you have things like required minimum distributions that can throw a wrench into any plan. You want to just make sure that you're being sound with your approach, with how you're investing your money, especially as you get older. So you have to be mindful of the fact of not always trying to get that high rate of return, although you want to get a decent rate of return, but you have to be careful.
You use the term black swan events, which means not just the market, but we all have events that occur in our lives that can impact our finances, especially at this time that's so critical that we are protecting the money that we have.
I talk about risk, and I tell people that true risk is everything that we're not talking about right now. Okay. So like last year, nobody really was talking about tariffs and the impact that could have. Nobody was. It was all about taxes and interest rates and things like that. Real risk lies in everything that we're not even talking about right now. And that's a global or domestic black swan that can have an impact, maybe the correction with housing, but then also is your health. Right? You can have an event, you just go to a doctor like this week, and then next thing you know, you got to see a specialist, and your whole entire world unravels, and you have to ask yourself, is everything set up the right way right now? If something like that happened. And I use an example in the book, the game we played as kids, red light, green light. All of a sudden, we're all at the line, and green light comes, and we're running, and they say red light, and you stop. But what happens in your personal life if I said red light? You can't make a change. You can't do anything right now. If something happened, are you okay? Do you have everything set up, whether it's wills, umbrella policies, if there was a sickness, whatever that is? So it's important to really pay attention to all these things because you don't know about them until they happen.
Are you a dollar cost averaging kind of guy when it comes to laying money aside for the future?
I call that a micro in my book. There's macros and there's micros, right? It's really common knowledge if you're going to go into something you dollar cost average, just because we don't know how markets are going to behave. I think what happens with planning and people is that it's very important to get macro, to step outside of the world. Maybe it's just not your money manager or your insurance professional, your CPA, and to really strategically look at what's available and how can you use all the tools to do different things. I always tell people in retirement, there's 3 functions of money, and they're simple, but they're important to understand. The first function of money in retirement is income. Which assets are going to be used to create income? The second function is liquidity. And that's something where maybe you might take on a risk. You don't need it. Some people today, they're like, how about crypto? Like that's your liquidity. If you need it, you need an expense. And then lastly, legacy. And they kind of waterfall effect into each other. So you have to look at these functions and say, okay, what are we doing now? Are we in the income function? And what are the roles and responsibilities of these assets or investments?
One of the things you mentioned earlier was required minimum distributions. I wanted to bring up a couple of topics that are generally specific to people who are entering into their retirement years where they're drawing out of their savings or out of their investments and they have less income or no income. What is a required minimum distribution and why is it so important that we pay attention to it?
A required minimum distribution is an actuarial calculation determined by the IRS. That's basically what it is. And it's all age-based. So depending on your birthday, They'll be an age, whether it's 72, 73, 74, 75, depending on your age, because they just made a change. And they're going to basically require you to take a percentage of all of your qualified assets to satisfy this IRS requirement. And the reason why you have to pay attention to it is if you understand what a safe withdrawal rate is in general, in contrast to the RMD, you would hear like the 4% safe withdrawal rate. That's something on the internet and talked about. RMD percentage actually is going to contradict that and be higher and increase as you get older. So even though if you're going to do prudent planning, the IRS comes along and says, hey, by the way, we don't really care about your safe 4%. We need 4.5, 5, and it actually increases as you get older. So you need to pay attention to that because like this year happens, and the person I was actually meeting with, she said her account was down 30% and it was an IRA. And she's like, I took my RMD and I said, geez, taking your RMD while it's down 30% is not the best strategy. So you need to really have a plan. I find that people need to actually have an RMD strategy depending on your assets. And the other thing you have to pay attention to is where the money is. So if it's in an old 401k, because you like that 401k, because you didn't move it to an IRA, you have to take that distribution separately. Or if it's a TSP, separately. Or if everything moved into an IRA, then you can pick where's the best spot. That's something I talk about with a lot of people. And sometimes people are not aware that the percentage increases. They just thought it was a set amount of money, and it's not.
Are you able to then reinvest some of that money? Or if you have to take out more than you need, in other words, are you able to do something with that money that's smart?
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things that people can do with that scenario. Like I run through an example of a person that has $1 million and they're taking their RMDs off. You have to be careful because if that account is down 9% while you're taking that distribution over that period of time, yes, you can take that money out and reinvest that. Maybe, and it's going to be a non-qualified account that you can use in case you need something, if you have to access money for a car or something for your home. But the fact of the matter is that if you are pulling that RMD and that account is down 9%, 8%, 10%, you are unnecessarily eroding that account down during that period. And a lot of people, because it's not like tangible, they don't realize because they'll say, well, geez, what else can I do? And that's where you just have to be really careful of like maybe set aside some money where it's sitting in cash earning 4 or 5% to handle that RMD. That's where that chasing rates of return come into, because somebody may say, well, geez, the market went up 12%, I missed out. But the fact of the matter is, if the accounts dropped 12%, you just saved a ton of money there, you know?
Here we are in a very unusual period of time, I think. The market appears to be shrinking right now, and some of our 401ks are decreasing in value. We don't want to panic, and yet at the same time, we want to be prudent. What are basic rules or advice would you give us when we have uncertain times, staying the course in this kind of environment?
You want to make sure the person you're working with understands retirement income and knowing that the markets are going to go up and the markets are going to go down, and having a plan in place, and then just being mindful that their accounts are properly invested and allocated the right way. It's important if people are working with an advisor, probably 80% of the advisors out there work with people while they're working, but there's a small segment of people that just only focus on people in retirement to help navigate what you're talking about. I don't work with people while they're working. It's not my area of expertise. The reason why I'm saying that is that there's a lot of very interesting tools you can use to simulate. And again, money isn't math, math isn't money, but simulate certain circumstances. And the number one priority for you is income. You have to look at your income and say between Social Security, pension, money coming off of investments, is this amount of money per month enough? Are you okay? I would just strongly recommend to look at your income goal, look at where it's coming from. We call it a security score, is what's coming in that's fixed, guaranteed, no matter what goes on in the world, that you know you're okay with. And then the balance is going to come from any risk-based portfolio. And things will change in 10 years because people in their 60s, there's a very big difference of a conversation I'm having with them when they're late 70s and in their 80s. So you want to make sure your income is okay. Whatever your strategy is, if it's dividend income, you have to be careful because those assets can drop 40%. You have to be okay psychologically to be saying, okay, my account's down 40%, but I have my dividends. There are some very unique annuity products that people can look into that do things very differently today than before. For example, they could provide a guaranteed stream of income like a pension plan, but they also can accumulate. The old-fashioned types of products, like that money would disappear, so you're trading money for income. But for people that are fairly young, like in your 60s is a very young retiree. 70s is where people are most likely retired. They have to be careful they're not outliving the money that they do have.
One of the issues I hear people talk about a lot is this pre-tax, post-tax challenge, whether or not to invest in a regular IRA or a Roth IRA and so on. One of those is pre-tax, one of those is post-tax. Should I be looking at the Roth? Should I be looking at as traditional investments? What's your advice on that?
I like the Roth approach. They grow without a tax and you can access them without a tax. Somebody may say, hey, let's do a Roth conversion. You can't give generic advice. It's going to depend on a lot of things. What's the break even? How long is it going to be? And that has to be done by each person differently. You have to look at what's your tax brackets today, run a proper report. A lot of times, if you're in your later 60s and 70s, it doesn't make sense over time, depending on your bracket or circumstance. Roth is fantastic. I don't know how long it's going to be around. Back in 2014, the government did a study. It's in my book. And the government concluded they lose out on future tax revenue. They would prefer you do pre-tax. That's a home run for them.
Harry, it seems like a diversified portfolio is the way to go.
Diversification is really important. And in my book, I talk about life insurance and specifically about whole life insurance. 99% of all my clients can't even get it because they're old and they don't qualify. But when they read about the strategies and things they can actually do, they're like, geez, I wish I would have done that. I myself am 58 and I have 13 life insurance policies that are all paid up when I'm 65. So everybody does things a little differently in their life. Obviously, investments and real estate and all that stuff is important too, but a lot of different diversification will help you in the long run.
Harry, one of your rules is that the best bank is the one that you build. I love that phrase. Can you share with us a little bit more about that idea?
Yeah. For younger people, put away some money into an insurance policy. If you design it correctly, it's accumulating money that's tax-free, that grows tax-free, and you can access it tax-free for the rest of your life. The compounding or exponential growth never stops. It will never, ever stop. College education planning, a 529 plan, this is a perfect example. When you put money away over time, it's not until the end of the second third you get exponential growth, right? And then once you get to the last third of exponential growth is where you're really getting that growth. Well, if you have a baby and you put away some money when they're born and you do that in the 18th year, just prior to that last third of growth, you literally take all that money and you give it to college, and that curve resets at that point in time. And so you'll never realize that, right? But if you understand like using an insurance product where you're building that bank, which I've done for my children, when they're 18, you're now taking that money out, whether it's $40,000, $60,000, $80,000, and that goes to pay for college. But that $80,000 is still in that account, growing and compounding as if it still is in the account. And that's because it's collateralized as a loan. It has to be the right policy, the right company, like all of the right stuff for what I'm explaining to work. It's not an IUL or variable universal life or anything like that. It has to be the right stuff. And when you understand it, it's very powerful because then you can actually lend that money out over and over for different things. For example, if a couple is in their 40s, they're going through a tough time financially, their credit is bad, they can't get a loan. A lot of times we can take out $20,000. It doesn't impact your credit at all because it's from a policy. You use the $20,000 to get rid of your credit card debt immediately. And because it's considered a non-recourse loan, you don't have to pay it back technically if you don't want to. So your credit will get fixed in a couple of months, no problem. It helps you out to do different things, different tasks in different periods of your life that we're not planning on. You can also use it like for me, where my kids are grown, I'm having my 7th grandchild. But if you need to lend money, I can lend money no matter what to my kids. I don't have to go to a bank. I don't have to liquidate my investments. It's another tool in your overall mix of what you have in your plan.
I have a question about distributions. We've talked about RMDs and so forth. More and more, seniors are working longer. Their health is good. They stay on the job longer. Some of them are working in their 70s. Not as many, but some do. Should you start taking your 401ks because you qualify, or should you keep on paying in and taking them when you retire? Any ideas on that?
We take a tax return and run it through a report, right? A 2-page summary report. You see if it's not bumping you up into different brackets for different things. So year by year, okay, what's the plan for this year? Are you going to work? How much you anticipate you're going to earn this year? And based on that, what are some of the distributions we should take? Again, nobody really has that crystal ball to understand where federal tax rates are going to be. Nobody knows where they're going to be next year. I think working is a great thing for people if they want to do it and they're healthy, of course. And then just being smart about the distributions. So as long as it's not bumping them up into a bracket unnecessarily. But yeah, I think taking distributions, enjoying your life, being smart from a tax standpoint, even if you are taking a $20,000 distribution out of an IRA where it's not bumping you up to the next bracket, you don't need it, but then you put it in a non-qualified brokerage account. That's a great move, you know?
Harry, you mentioned earlier in the program the 4% distribution rate, which is sort of the thing that you'll read about most on the internet and so forth. And I think most people have gotten in their heads that, okay, so I should be withdrawing about 4% per year, or that's the most I can, or what I should be taking out every year. Dave Ramsey talks about it's okay to take up to 8%. What kinds of things do we need to think about when we're looking at how much money we need to take out per year?
Great question. So anybody can Google Morningstar safe withdrawal rates. The interesting thing about the safe withdrawal rates is they change every year. They're 3.8% this year. Last year was 4%. The year before that was 3.8. So think about that. So this 4% is a general guideline. And the reason why it exists is because it gives the portfolio over time, 30 years in all market conditions, like how would it work or behave? And the reason why people use 4% is because you need to have reliable income, right? So you're like, okay, if I'm taking 4%, I need to have a budget per month. But what happens when you look at Dave Ramsey, and he's such a popular person, he's written a lot of books, he's got a Wikipedia page, and it's amazing. In November of 2023, he literally doubled down on this 8%, and he's having a battle with another person, Dr. Wade Pfau. Dr. Wade Pfau is one of the leading retirement income gurus in the United States of America, bar none, okay? And these two are battling it out in the media for real. And it's interesting because Dr. Wade Pfau is saying to Dave Ramsey, markets can be down. You can't take 8 when they're down, but for some reason, he doesn't want to realize the fact that it's not going to be a consistent rate of return. You can't run an analysis on 6% every year, and I'm taking this percentage off. It just doesn't work like that in the real world. So I did an analysis. We ran an example. If you did 8% in 1980, how would that work for 30 years? And it worked out okay. Then we ran it in 1990, and after the 10th year, where it peaked and then just dropped off right after that. And that person would have ran out of money technically. And then I ran it for the year 2000 and it took 9 years. So it really depends on where you are and when you will actually retire. I always tell people like that, there's a myth that you're going to run out of money. You know what really happens? You don't really ever run out of money. What happens is you actually live in fear because you're going to sit there and that account's going to get to a certain point. And then you're going to just say, I'm not going. Okay. We can't afford it. I'm not going to be able to go to the restaurant. So what happens, you're never going to run out of money. You run out of lifestyle. That's what you run out of because there'll be this psychological component that will say, hey, my account's down to 250. We can't go on that vacation or we can't afford that restaurant. So we're just not going to go. And then you basically run out of lifestyle, but you keep your money in that account out of fear.
It's always important, no matter how old we are, to have a working budget. I think what you're saying is how important it is for us to understand what our needs are, how much we need, and work that in tandem with our withdrawal rate, whatever that is.
Absolutely. When you look at your expenses of today, and you look at wealth erosion, it's not just taxes, inflation, it's planned obsolescence, technological change, fees, consumer financing. I did some research this morning in the state of New Jersey. There's between 55 to 75 different taxes, fees, federal, state, and local in the state of New Jersey. Okay. So that's just a component. Where we live in New Jersey, believe it or not, when we go to the supermarket, we have to buy bags. And it's not just regular bags. So there's cultural shifts. Like if you go to a restaurant years ago, you tip the person between 15 and 20, depending on the level of service. You go to a restaurant, at least around here, they want 20, 25, 30%. I'm like, 30%, that's a lot of money for a tip. So it's cultural shifts. So your money basically is eroding very close to, believe it or not, 15%. And it's not just tax inflation that most people talk about.
Man, that's really scary. One of the things we have to be paying attention to is preservation of our money. What are some strategies you can give us to make sure that we're preserving what we have, even in difficult times?
Preserving is very important. And if you look back 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you could barely get 1% in a bank, right? Recently, we've all had the fortune of having 4.5%, 5%, 5.5%, right? And people are like, wow, it's like Mardi Gras. It's fantastic, which is great. One of my concerns is that if rates do drop, and it's just a matter of time, I think, where do you put your money where it's at least getting some type of growth? And that's where it's important to understand even some insurance products that are out there where you can maybe get some of these rates of return or some of the protections that you have in addition to your investments. Again, you definitely want to look at all options that are out there. There's a lot of very new, interesting products that people can look at, even from a long-term care planning perspective. The new products out there, they're not like the old ones where you're paying that premium, and if you have a heart attack, you lose everything. It's a whole different ball game.
Harry, is there anything that we're missing here that's really critically important for people who are in the latter part of their life?
You're not going to always be right. You just never know, right? So be mindful of, okay, I want to look at some things that are conservative. What are my options? And then talk to someone about all the different various options and then make a decision based on that. It's always important, no matter where you are, even if things are perfect. I'll give you an example. I met a very nice couple and they were 67. They were perfect. They had rental income, a bunch of CDs that were coming due, and they had this annuity that they loved, and they got it from a very good friend of theirs. And they came walking into my office and everything literally was perfect. And we were able to look at what they were doing, and they had a good amount of money. We looked at that and they were able to make one change where that was giving them $68,000 of income a year. And we made one move and they were able, there was no cost, there were no fees, there was literally nothing that happened, where they were able to get $117,000 a year with the same money. That's a fantastic amount of money. And think about that. They're like 67 years old and they discovered all this extra money that they have with no risk. So you want to go out and explore, have a conversation, talk to people, get a better understanding of things that you can utilize. There's different programs out there that don't cost money. And one last piece of advice, I always say to someone, if you're self-directing your portfolio and you are adverse to a managed money fee for your assets, I always say to them, listen, you always want to have A players on your bench, because if you're taking care of things for the last 20, 30, 40 years and you're doing a great job, the last thing you want, if you're in your late 70s, 80s with a health problem, going to doctors and trying to interview a planner to help you when that's happening, it's the worst time. If you're at your A game and you know your stuff right now, make sure you get people on your bench to say, hey, listen, I'm not fully going to give you everything right now, but I just want to test you out. I want to just see how it's going, because I want to have backup plans. Because let me tell you, the last thing you want to be dealing with when you have doctors or health concerns is trying to interview for a new relationship.
We've been talking to Harry Abrahamson, who has written a book, Money Rules, 9 Rules for Massive Wealth. Harry, tell us what's going on in your life and how we can get a hold of you, your social media, and any upcoming things.
Thanks. We have a YouTube channel we are launching. It's called Retire with Harry. It's exclusively designed for people that are thinking about retirement or already in it. We'll be talking about all kinds of different topics and whatever is relevant that's happening right now. Social media, Instagram, that's my fun account. That's just me living my life, doing the things I'm doing. It's not related to business, but it's just all pure fun. And of course, our website. And if they want to get the book, it's on Amazon. They can go there, Money Rules. They can type in my name and my book pops up. But yeah, that's how they can reach me.
Harry, thanks for being with us today. So appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Don. I appreciate being here today.
That's it for today's episode of Peaceful Life Radio. We hope you found inspiration and insights to help you live with purpose and fulfillment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use encouragement. The best chapters of your life are still ahead. Until next time, this is David Lowry and Don Drew, encouraging you to age intentionally with peace, purpose, and joy.